All right, let's dive into a story that's been hiding in plain sight for way too long. We're talking about the Kamarupa Kingdom, an absolute powerhouse that ran the show in northeast India for nearly 800 years. It's a fascinating history, so let's get right into it.
So this incredible 800-year story is basically broken down into three major dynasties. First up, you've got the Varmans. They're the ones who really built this thing from the ground up. Then come the Mlechas, who took over and got really smart with their politics to stay in power. And we'll wrap it up with the Palas, the last dynasty to rule a united Kamarupa, before things started to change.
Okay, so here's a quick look at how we're going to tackle this. We'll see how the kingdom got started, watch it grow through those three big dynasties, and then look at how it eventually broke apart and what it left behind.
All right, first things first, where does Kamarupa even pop up on the historical map? The first real solid mention of it doesn't actually come from some local myth or legend. It comes from one of the biggest empires of the time.
And this is a really important point. When Kamarupa shows up in the history books, it's not as some place that got conquered. No way. The mighty Gupta Empire recognized it as a frontier kingdom. That means it was its own sovereign state. So what does that tell us? It tells us that by the 4th century, Kamarupa was already a big deal, a real political player in the Brahmaputra Valley.
Now, you might hear two different names for this place, so let's clear that up. Pragyotisha. That's kind of the old-school, epic name the kings used for themselves in their own records. Kamarupa is the name everyone else, the outsiders, used. Eventually, people just started using both names to mean the same thing.
All right, that brings us to our first major dynasty, the Varmans. These guys are the ones who took that little frontier state and over the next 300 years turned it into an absolute powerhouse.
And they didn't do it overnight. It was a step-by-step process, generation by generation. You've got Pusya Varman, the founder, kicking things off. Then his successors start gobbling up neighboring territories. And check this out. By the time we get to Bhuti Varman, they're performing these huge horse sacrifices. Now that was like a giant neon sign saying, "We have imperial ambitions," all while they were pushing into what's now Bangladesh.
Okay, this is the moment Kamarupa really steps into the big leagues. Under their most famous king, Bhaskara Varman, they make a super smart move. They form an alliance with the legendary emperor Harshavardhana. And the plan? They're going to team up to put the squeeze on their common enemy, the Gauda Kingdom of Bengal, hitting them from both east and west.
And did it work? Oh yeah, it worked. This quote here says it all. It's from a land grant, a pretty standard royal document. But the key isn't what it says, it's where it was written. Bhaskara Varman issued this grant from his victorious camp at Karnasuvarna. And Karnasuvarna? That was the capital city of his enemy. I mean, talk about the ultimate power move. This was the absolute peak for the Varman dynasty.
But you know how these things go. That kind of peak is hard to maintain. After Bhaskara Varman passed away without leaving an heir, things got a bit chaotic. A power vacuum opened up, and a new group stepped in to fill it, a local indigenous dynasty called the Mlechas.
So, you've got these new rulers. How do you make sure everyone accepts you? Well, the Mlechas came up with a pretty brilliant political play. The Varmans before them had claimed they were descended from a god. So what did the Mlechas do? Even though they weren't related at all, they just adopted the exact same origin story. It was genius, really. It created a sense of stability and made it seem like a natural continuation of power. And it wasn't just a change in who was on the throne. The Mlectra era brought some big shifts in how the kingdom was run. For one, they moved the capital to a new city, Harupeshwara. But more importantly, the whole structure of the state started to change. It became a bit more feudal, Local governors and other rulers under the king started getting more power and autonomy in their own regions. Fast forward about 250 years, and history kind of repeats itself. The Mleksha line runs out of heirs. But what happened next wasn't some big invasion or civil war. Instead, we see another major power shift in Kamarupa. And this one was, well, pretty unique for the time.
Get this, the new king, a guy named Brahmapala, wasn't a conqueror, and he didn't inherit the throne. He was elected. The different regional chieftains actually got together and chose him to be their king. They basically held a vote to prevent the kingdom from falling into chaos. It's a really fascinating moment, and it's super similar to how the famous Pala Empire next door in Bengal got its start.
So, this new Pala dynasty in Kamarupa had its own moment in the sun. They had strong rulers like Dharmapala. They even moved the capital again. But they were dealing with a lot of pressure from the outside, especially from their very powerful neighbors, the other Pala Empire. And all that constant pressure, well, it started to create cracks in the foundation of the kingdom.
And right around the year 1100, those cracks finally gave way. After the Pala dynasty faded, that strong central power that had held Kamarupa together for almost 800 years, it just dissolved. The great unified kingdom was about to shatter.
And it wasn't like it happened all at once. It was more like a slow crumbling. As you can see here, first the western part just breaks off and goes independent. Then new bosses pop up in the central and southern regions. The original core kingdom gets smaller and smaller, until finally a new power rises from the pieces, the Kamata kingdom in the west.
So the end of Kamarupa wasn't just an ending. It was also a new beginning. It wasn't a void. It was more like an incubator. From the old territories, new kingdoms started to sprout. The Kachari, the Chutia, and the one you've probably heard of, the mighty Ahom kingdom. And these new states would go on to write the next chapter of history in the region for centuries to come. So when you look at the big picture, what's the main takeaway here? The story doesn't just stop in the 12th century. The legacy of this 800-year-long kingdom is still very much alive. Its culture, its political structures, that DNA is still a huge part of Northeast India, Bangladesh, and Bhutan today. It really makes you think, right? And that's a wrap on our whirlwind tour of the Kamarupa Kingdom. If you want more deep dives just like this one, you should definitely check out our full South Asia history playlist here on Notebook Summaries. Thanks so much for joining me, and hey, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what we break down next.